Good evening, you are watching the Ukraine on Fire project. My name is Raul. I'll tell you three pieces of news. Russia has abandoned the Easter truce. Russia blames Ukraine for stalling negotiations. Russia has again changed the goals of the special operation. The news is unexpectedly expected. I could reflect on each of the news for a long time, but this is unproductive. It is much more important to understand why no one can be sure that Russia is ready to implement any agreements, even if only for 5 minutes. Even if we are talking about a small humanitarian corridor for 3 buses. They will definitely break their word where it is absolutely unnecessary to break it. It doesn't solve anything. The simplest explanation is that the leader of modern Russia is a man of a specific profession. In it, to deceive and misinform is a special prowess. This explains a lot, but not everything. Here it is important to pay attention to the behavior of some leaders of powerful European countries. They have never been KGB lieutenant colonels, except probably Angela Merkel, while the Dodge is no worse than Putin. A new specific club of Eurosceptics has even appeared in Ukraine. It was formed from former lovers of Mother Russia, survivors of the massacre in Mariupol, Bucha, Irpin, Chernigov, Nikolaev, and other cities of Ukraine. Everything according to the textbook, these people evolved under the influence of an aggressive external environment. I have already said that rockets heal. Especially if these are rockets sent by your beloved Russian world. But they don't heal completely.
This war has the main goal, to weaken Russia, the Russian world, because the Russian genotype, which should give offspring, perishes in the war. This is part of the task of genocide. When through war they try to lead to a point of no return and the impossibility of reviving the nation. By destroying the healthiest, smartest, most productive members of the nation.
In other words, if we proceed from the fact that Russian Ukrainians are one people, then right now this people is dying out.
Imagine cockroaches living in your kitchen. And you managed to create such conditions that they began to kill each other. And you feed the side that loses so that the losses are as large as possible. The Americans themselves sternly declare that we are not going to fight. And they want to achieve all their military political goals by such actions.
I don't know why this man calls his fellow citizens cockroaches and us brothers. But I am sure that if Russians and our Eurosceptics are told for a long time about the competitive advantages of cockroaches over people, then anything is possible. But even a broken clock shows the exact time twice a day. So it is with Eurosceptics. They are right that our interests today coincide with Britain, the US and the European Union. Their interests are not selfless, like the interests of any person on earth. But why did they cease to coincide with the interests of Russia? For decades, everyone has benefited from cooperation with the Russian Federation. Developed countries bought oil and gas from Russia and sold iPhones and Gucci bags to local endemics at exorbitant prices. Everyone was happy. European and American politicians vomited black caviar directly onto their sable coats. The Russians bought up every castle, winery, and every Rolls-Royce, Maybach, and Ferrari they had in stock. Some, of course, grimaced at the behavior of wealthy Russians, but nothing smooths wrinkles like contemplation of convincing amounts in bank accounts. Ask Gerhard Schröder, the former Chancellor of Germany, on errands with Russia. So why did mutual happiness end? Everything is simple. We are a civilization of contracts and treaties. Contracts and agreements at all levels, from the small vegetable stall near your house to the NATO alliance, protect people, their property, their country from chaos and imminent destruction. Every time any Gaddafi, Hussein, or Putin violate contracts and agreements, wars break out in the world and hundreds of thousands or millions of people die. Russia violated contracts several times, but wagon loads of money obscured the horizon for European politicians. And they did not notice the fire that flared up in the center of Europe. In 2022, Russia violated all possible contracts. We are talking about biblical, interstate, any contracts. I repeat once again, this has happened in history, but for the first time in the history of civilizations, a nuclear power has turned into an uncontrollable hooligan, which cannot be defeated in the classical military sense without mutual destruction. Many may object, what about the threats from the USSR? The fact is that even the evil empire did not allow itself to threaten with nuclear weapons so clearly, so obviously, with such cynicism and frequency.
Russia is the only country in the world that is really capable of turning the United States into radioactive ashes.
Let me remind you that Ukraine is just an intermediate stage in ensuring the strategic security of the Russian Federation.
Russian special operation in Ukraine. The fact that it resulted can already be safely called the Third World War. Absolutely, right now we are fighting, if not with NATO, then certainly with NATO infrastructure.
Timid Western leaders like Macron and Scholz would surely be able to turn a blind eye to the massacres in Irpin, Bucha, Makarov, and Mariupol. They probably would have swallowed the annexation of all of Ukraine, but Putin was unlucky twice. He was unable to win a quick victory and began to threaten all nuclear weapons. At that moment, all contracts were nullified, and Western politicians realized that Russian money had become so toxic that playing along with Russia would cost not only a career, but possibly a prison term. Except for Hungary, which was already on the wrong side with quite tangible territorial losses. By the way, this was done by a friend of Vladimir Putin, Joseph Stalin, not Ukraine. But even Hungary understands what a contract is and where wet dreams of a mythical revenge lead. It is obvious to me that today there is a consensus in the US, Britain and the EU that Russia is not capable of negotiating and its continued existence poses a threat to the civilization of contracts. The war will consist of 3 phases: the defeat of the Russian Federation on the battlefield, the collapse of Putinism after the defeat in Ukraine, the collapse of the Russian Federation into several nuclear powers with their further demilitarization. In other words, nuclear weapons in exchange for humanitarian aid for the population. The first phase is coming to an end. The collapse of Putinism may drag on for several years. The collapse will happen instantly, as was the case with the Soviet Union. The West will provide Ukraine with any weapons other than nuclear weapons and enough money to keep the economy going. Our soldiers and civilians will have to die. This is our civilizational contract. 30 years of mutual squabbles and corruption made it impossible to sign a better one. Our task is very simple: to stop Putin, break his military machine, and provoke a political crisis inside Russia. Yes, soldiers and civilians will die every day, war weariness will accumulate and thoughts will appear, maybe sit down at the negotiating table with Putin. Maybe the Eurosceptics are right, this is a war between the West and the Russian Federation, and we are the battlefield. Can we somehow agree? Let's look at Mariupol.
The operation to destroy and clean up Mariupol ended today. Fulfilled the instructions of the president of the country, Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin.
We will never agree with them. We were ordered to be destroyed. Russia will never tolerate a prosperous, strong, and independent Ukraine. We are anti-Russia for them. And we must understand that if we go for an unjust peace now, a new war with Russia is inevitable in 10 years. And we will have to send our own children to war and see them die in our place because we haven't done our job. Of course, we can still choose between war and shame, but what's the point in choosing shame if the war is already in full swing? For example, the Chechen TikTok troops emphasize by their actions that shame is their permanent state, and the craving for someone else's property is simply indestructible. Mr. Kadyrov, Vladimir Vladimirovich said that you are coming to free us, not to rob us. You are an infantryman, why don't you follow the orders of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief? I understand the temptation is great. This is the Nissan X-Trail 2008. Anyone's head will spin. And what is this story with Putin's order to destroy Mariupol? Interesting to hear your explanation. But ordinary soldiers of the Russian Federation have no support for Kadyrov. Now the marauders are being robbed by the FSB.
What do you say you took?
63 phones.
63 what?
iPhone. Model with 516 gigabytes. Everything is gone. The FSB took everything.
И куда вы дели это все? ФС забрали. Кто забрал?
63 brand new iPhones. Everything that was acquired by overwork. The soldier's wife has not yet realized the depth of this catastrophe. But I think, after the conversation, she looked at the prices, figured out the profit, and now it's better for this man to die somewhere in the Don base, and not return home without money. At the same time, the Russians are not at all ashamed of everything that their army is doing in Ukraine. They even launched a flash mob with the hashtag #NotAshamed.
Russia is strength, glory, these are great people. Poem. When the last Russian stands on the edge of the grave, leaving, earth will cease to be earth, and God will cry as we die. He suddenly yells into the void, fuck you demons. Don't wait. I'll survive all hell. Let the world know God will not cry. And the Russian race will not dry out. God loves Russia, which means that the last Russian will not die. And McDonald's never leaves. KFC stays too. IKEA remains. They just decided to suspend their activities for 3 months. And everyone was offended. They say we won't visit you again.
If you were killed, what would you say at the last second? Typhoon, call fire on yourself. All fire on yourself. All fire on me. Farewell men. Let's live. Glory to Russia. This is for you guys.
The last video almost brought me to tears. To throw 190,000 soldiers with a huge amount of equipment into a foreign country, and in a month he causes fire on himself. What did you forget here? Why did you die here? Why aren't you all ashamed? Why are you still whining about McDonald's and reading poems about how the last Russian will be gone? Who attacked you? Against the backdrop of how the Russians are not ashamed that their army attacked Ukraine, look how the Japanese TV presenter reacts to the fact that Putin awarded the 64th Brigade that killed and raped Ukrainians in Bucha and Irpin.
President Putin congratulates the unit and notes their heroic actions and courage. And he highly appreciates the unit as a role model in special military operations.
プーチン大統領はこの部隊について偉大な英雄的行動と勇気を祝福し、特別軍事作戦の手本となるような存在だとして称えています。VTR でもお伝えしました製鉄所に未だに市民の方が多く残っています。ごめんなさい。失礼しました。そんな中でごめんなさい、ちょっとさっきの 重要なニュースがちょっと悔しい思いで読んでしまいました。すいません、冷静さを保ちます。ウクライナ東部での戦闘が新たな局面に入ったと言います。ここからは安全保障軍事戦略がご専門の防衛研究所高橋杉雄さんに解説をいただきます。よろしくお願いいたします。
By the way, I always knew that our fraternal people are the Japanese, not the Russians. The choice between sushi and cabbage soup is obvious to every Ukrainian. But I am determined to end our today's episode on a positive note. I have great news for the parents and relatives of the dead sailors on the cruiser Moskva. According to the Russian Ministry of Defense, only one sailor died on the cruiser. Another 27 passed into the state of Schrödinger's cat. This is a typical state, known since antiquity, when the world was divided into the dead, the living, and sailors. Because you could never know for sure if they were alive or not. And the Russian Ministry of Defense honors the traditions of the Argonauts and Odysseus. You watched the Ukraine on Fire project. Rule was with you. The Russian Federation will be destroyed. Glory to Ukraine.
Moscow first, 2 holes. Propellers are stalled. Strong roll on board. I repeat, roll aboard. The battery is damaged. I confirm, the holes are below the waterline. The bridge is silent. Roll 30 degrees. Let's get on board. Understood, understood. I cross out.